So this video lecture is going to talk to you guys a bit about a couple of Modernist Manifestos. So F.S. Flint's Imagisme, which is a sort of an explanation, sort of a version of the Imagist Manifesto, even though the Imagists didn't have a manifesto. And then we're going to talk about a text called Long Live the Vortex, published in Blast magazine. Now, both of these, interestingly enough, were intimately associated with Ezra Pound, who was an American poet. Pound did live in Britain for a while, and he was deeply connected with promoting the careers of several important British modernists like James Joyce and T.S. Eliot and stuff like this. Pound shifted allegiances from Imagism to Vorticism. And so we get these two different manifestos, or these two different sets of ideas, both from Pound's career. So, in Imagisme by F.S. Flint, we have a set of guidelines connected with the Imagists. So, essentially, we can say the sort of key component here, we actually get this on 2065. He says, their only endeavor was to write in accordance with the best tradition as they found it in the best writers of all time. So the idea here is that the Imagists have identified a set of really three rules or three guidelines, and they argue that these things characterize the best writing of all time, and the only poets or the only writers worth reading are those who subscribe to this tradition. And this is actually pretty straightforward manifesto type stuff, because typically manifestos focus on providing a short set of guidelines and then establishing that as the only thing really worth doing. So the three rules that they give us. 1. Direct treatment of the thing, whether subjective or objective. 2. To use absolutely no word that did not contribute to the presentation. 3. As regarding rhythm, to compose in sequence of the musical phrase, not in sequence of a metronome. So essentially our three rules here are pared down poetry. So minimalist language, minimalist presentation, direct treatment of whatever it is that's being written about. So unlike, say, the Romantics, who treat human experience, human emotion through indirection, so Wordsworth may sort of present his anxieties or present his emotional experience through a meditation on nature. For the Imagists, you engage directly with emotion, or you engage directly with nature and treat those things as themselves. That's actually rule number 1. I transposed 1 and 2. And then poetry should have a musical quality to it. So it should have a lyric rhythm rather than a more sort of direct, something like iambic pentameter. So rather than focusing on sort of traditional metrics, this is about sound and the way that sound moves. So these are attempts to construct a new sort of epistemology of poetics. And we get a sense of this actually in the last paragraph. All of this stuff I've been talking about is on 2065, by the way. We get a sense of this, art as a new epistemology, Imagist poetry as a new epistemology, when Flint says, they consider that art is all science, all religion, philosophy, and metaphysic. So we get this sense that the goal of this manifesto and the goal of the Imagists and the Modernists in general is to create a new set of guidelines for understanding culture, understanding aesthetics, and by extension, understanding one's place in the world. Now, Pound moves on from Imagism to Vorticism, to this sort of, and we get this term from the title Long Live the Vortex, this idea of the vortex as the space where everything, so I think it'll be helpful actually to think about the vortex in terms of Yeats's poem, The Second Coming, which we read for last week, for week 5. Turning and turning at a widening gyre, things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Yeats has a widening gyre, sort of a widening spin. Like if you think of this as a sort of tornado, this is I think the way to think of this as a sort of visual image. The vorticists go the opposite direction. Pound and the others go the opposite direction. So they still are thinking of this as a sort of tornado, as a spinning vortex, but they're more concerned about sort of energy being directed toward the center. So whereas Yeats is talking about a widening gyre, the vortex is focusing. So this is about sort of constructing energy and pulling everything toward a single point. And one of the things that we get really visually here in both of these sections from Blast, both Long Live the Vortex and even more in number 6 here, from 2074 to 2077, a lot of modernist manifestos and even modernist poetry in general was very interested in spacing and the way that spacing is presented. So you can see here, I mean, we've got things like cap-locked text, what we would now call cap-locked, all caps. But then if you look at 2074 and 2075, you get sort of differences in how text is presented, different sizes of text, bolded text, things organized in specific ways across the page. And all of this is done as part of the visual aesthetics of the page, because modernist artists, modernist writers frequently went beyond just constructing meaning through words, but started constructing meaning through visual presentation, because of course they had a lot of connections with visual artists. But the idea of the vortex is keyed into the individual. So what they essentially want to do is transcend identity categories. So they spend a lot of time here opposing the idea of social class, opposing the idea of nationality and things like this, even opposing the idea of collectives. Like we take at the top of 2073, it has nothing to do with the people. And this may be anti-democratic, which it probably actually was, because Pound and a number of other people associated with Vorticism were supporters of fascism. But fundamentally, the idea here is that the individual becomes the center point of the vortex. The individual, not as a working class person, not as a peasant, not as an aristocrat, not as a white person, whatever it is, not as a British person or a German or a Nigerian or whatever it is, but as an individual. And they have this notion of the individual that transcends identity categories. So, I mean, it's a complicated idea because you have to imagine a sort of core individualism that is opposed, or that's not connected at all to any specific category of identity. So, 2072, they say here near the bottom of the page, Blast will be popular, essentially. It will not appeal to any particular class, but to the fundamental and popular instincts in every class and description of people, to the individual. The moment a man feels or realizes himself as an artist, he ceases to belong to any milieu or time. Blast is created for this timeless, fundamental artist that exists in everybody. So there's this idea of the essential human, the essential individual, not constrained by or connected to class, race, nationality, religion, ethnicity, employment, gender, maybe, who knows? I mean, they do say the moment a man feels himself. So this still may be gendered, for all we can tell. Although they do later hope that that Lady Mond will become a vorticist. So maybe not. It's maybe non-gendered as well. But we've got this sort of notion here that you can transcend all components of identity and get to some essentially human individual artist. So, and that's what they propose. That's what they sort of propose appealing to. But they don't sort of say anything about how to get there or what that means or anything like this. So, it's a weird sort of epistemological move because it assumes an ontological reality, an ontological sort of core of the human that has nothing to do with identity categories, but it gives us no way of knowing or understanding what that involves or what that looks like beyond the statement that once you realize that you're an artist, you get there.